While a small handful of shows come somewhat close, Mad Men is without doubt my favorite television series of all time, and as a result, it probably doesn't come as a surprise that I think it's masterful in practically every facet. The dialogue is unbelievably layered, subtextual, and authentic. The audiovisual presentation is artful and elegant, the character writing and exploration are unbelievable, and the dynamics just grow and grow over the series in such fantastic ways. But if I was forced to pick a favorite individual element of the series, it would be the setting and the way that it's presented on a micro and macro scale, simply because of how much sheer joy I feel at being able to immerse myself in this world and exist within it. When I watch Mad Men, I forget completely about everything else going on in my life, and that is because the show intends for this. The texture of the setting, complemented by its presentation and dialogue, is so authentic and rich that no matter the context, I simply adore losing myself in it. Whether that be in reference to Don's office within the grander Sterling Cooper, or whether that be speaking of 1960s New York in general. The skyscrapers, the suburbs, the restaurants and bars. The unromantic, unapologetic grittiness of the seediness of the city juxtaposed with the cozy ambience during winter and Christmas time. This setting is brought to life through a language established through set and costume design, direction, color design, dialogue, and more. And due to all of this, I cannot overstate just how much I adore dropping myself into the world of Mad Men. Now, a huge element of the story, arguably the primary one, is the idea of time moving on during this crucial decade and how our primary characters find themselves situated as the world progresses forward. How America shifted culturally and politically during this defining decade, how the youth began dictating things, how new ideas and counterculture became king going into the 70s. All of those ideas are extremely prevalent in every element of the story, and I'm obsessed with how that manifests in the visual language of the series. The style of fashion opens up and becomes more laid back and bright, with women gradually starting to wear shorter skirts and more colorful dresses, and men growing facial hair and being generally less formal. Don's living space, one of the locations of foundation for the series, shifts from the traditional idyllic suburban family home in the first 3 seasons to an independent and nice but overall dark and gloomy apartment in season 4, before opening up to this beautiful suite in season 5 and on when he moves in with Megan. Open concept, filled in with celebration and fun and furniture and misery, a true example of a blank slate to be built upon to represent the growing free spirit of the era. And you can see similar evolutions in the living situations for characters like Sally, Peggy, and Pete. But the most important location in the series by far is the office, the place I find myself looking at the nooks and crannies of the most by design. And so it is naturally reflective of this evolution as well. It begins as the very straight-laced, professional, and buttoned-up layout of the first Sterling Cooper office of seasons 1 to 3. Carpeted, elegant floors and finish, pristine wooded walls, rows of secretarial desks in orderly fashion. It is a beautiful office, but the layout and structure are quite rigid and stifling, with lots of gray and brown, not much color or expression in the environment. But once they move into the new Sterling Cooper Draper Price office in the Time Life building, things become much more free-form and full of life to reflect the shifting times. Here the layout is much less stiff and the color palette opens up, with less carpet and lots of white, large open windows and bright colors. There is no rigid layout, and instead things feel much more open. The decorations are ramped up for the holidays, with bits of color and quirk and inspiration open to all in the walk-in creative lounge at the center. And this all shows the flexibility, dynamism, and shifting feel and vibe of the era. Things are more colorful, free, less restrictive, and more expressive, representing the counterculture of the time and even adding a second floor to enhance the impact and feeling of all of this as we get into the late 60s. And even the visual direction becomes more interesting and experimental as we go on. Narratively, we have characters representative in ways of the strict traditionalist ideas of eras gone by who pass away in the series, from minor characters like Roger's mother and Pete's parents and Adam and Grandpa Gene, to major ones like Betty, Bert, or Lane, all of whom represented in some way some elements of the world that were being swiftly left behind. And we have characters introduced around the midpoint and pivot, seasons 4 and 5, that represent this shift as more established ones evolve. In addition, the more the series goes on, the more we explore Los Angeles too. The sun and open space and beaches and resorts and parties and color, with everything being new and fresh and full of ideas and spirit. Overall, in every degree, the texture and form of the series, the visual language in the setting, opens up, becomes free and less stifled, and expresses a vibrancy that makes Season 1 feel so different from 7 in this gradual evolution on all fronts aesthetically. And this is naturally reflected in every element of the series, but I think that it would all fall flat if not propped up by an aesthetic that supports it. Just looking at each season's aesthetic individually shows that Weiner & Company had such a keen eye on not just evolving the aesthetic with the story, but ensuring that the aesthetic was a story on its own. Season 1 is settled, structured, traditional, and imposing visually, full of brown walls, black and gray suits, and muted dress for the women for the most part, with Joan being the stark exception because she's Joan, and Rachel Menken as well. Obviously, the entire season is not gray, and we explore variable environments throughout with tons of life and color. I don't at all intend to make it seem like this is a monochrome show. It's bursting with life everywhere, and that's part of why I love it. But the overall impression and feel of the aesthetic of the office, the primary location, is one communicating a strict, polished elegance to establish the poetic cadence of the story in Season 1. Season 2 then opens things up a bit, starting to get a little variable with things as the story begins to ponder the shifting of eras and the influence of youth. The color palette, previously quite cold in places, gets notably warmer and more rich. Things get a bit more casual, and bits of color are brought forth through the addition of characters like Bobby Barrett and Jane Siegel, while abstract expressionism is dwelt on through Bert's painting, and we're able to see brighter, more creative and fun environments like Sal's apartment and Los Angeles for the first time. Season 3 evolves this further, taking us to garden parties and school festivals, continuing to evolve the fashion a tad, and particularly giving us lots of greenery and outdoors. Betty's dreams, Roger and Jane's party, some of the scenes with Miss Farrell, and a decent amount of higher class environments. Henry's office, Connie's hotel. It keeps it pushing and variable and gives us a glimpse at established people in power right before transitioning into the period of the show that will reveal a different way forward in Season 4. The new office is key here, as is starting off with a beautiful Christmas ambience so early, and it's a bit of a shock to the system to see how different, bright, and open things are in this smaller but more modern office. But things are still a bit muted through Dawn's apartment, this lonely, gloomy place seemingly eternally cloaked in shadows, feeling darker than almost the entirety of the rest of the world due to Dawn's emotional state despite it being a nice enough place. However, another trip to LA and a marriage proposal paves the way for things to brighten up in Season 5, and we move into this drop-dead gorgeous, beautifully stylish, modern and open new apartment for Megan and Dawn. Megan's introduction in particular is key here, being a diametric contrast to the traditionalist patriarchal values we see through Betty's early role. She's younger, colorful, more progressive, and modern, and her introduction into the series coinciding with the new office, the bold new apartment, much more frequent run-ins with drugs and places outside of New York, and the biggest turning point in the series is no coincidence. She isn't among my absolute favorite characters, nor would I say that she's one of the most central, but she's essential to me for the form and colors of Mad Men, and how it reflects the shifting tone of the show and the changing era along with the bold evolutionary character arcs of some that we've known throughout the series. The atmosphere continues to progress and brighten here in Season 5, with fun trips to the suburbs, formal events and balls, a bit of a theater aesthetic added through Megan's return to acting, a very old yet open mansion for Betty and Henry to move into, and the confident introduction of formerly suppressed and hidden minority groups represented by Dawn and Joyce, both of whom take up roles that juxtapose how minorities were approached in the series previously, while of course not trying to imply that there isn't still a long way to go, but just showing a change. The world is moving at a rapid pace, and there is some very good and some bad associated with that, as is the case with any change. But change it will, and our characters need to adapt, otherwise they will be left behind. Notably, it is around this time where Dawn actually begins to look a little dated at some of these events such as the Rolling Stones concert. He is eternally tall, dark, and handsome, but his classic combed-back suit and tie feel much more stiff in 1966 compared to how natural and seamlessly part of the world he looked in Season 1. Season 6 begins going full force into the shorter skirts and more colorful outfits, as well as the longer hair for the men, and the addition of the second floor exponentially enhances the overall openness and boldness of the new office and its ambience, along with broadening the aesthetic even more with an exploration of Hawaii, more Los Angeles, Sally's boarding school, more events, and seeing more of Dawn and Megan's building. By this point, the overall feel and aesthetic of Mad Men is in keeping with the same soul as always, but at the same time feels totally transformed. And that leads us into Season 7, where facial hair is at its loudest and we spend more time outside the office than ever before it is torn down. But not before we get some last celebrations of this place and all that it was through Roger and Peggy's roller skating piano duet. We briefly return to a beautiful office reminiscent of the old Sterling Cooper one with McCann Erickson, but notably, Dawn takes his leave of it to show that while some things, established power being one of them, never change, change itself is still eternal and things will always be left behind. And with that, the aesthetic goes full circle and beyond, always changing, yet in some ways, always feeling the same. Mad Men, to me, is more of a world and an immersive experience than a story. A dip into this part of American history and culture into a world that is dark and miserable, but likewise intoxicating and rich and textured and atmospheric. And most of all, one that is full of life and people constantly pushing for change. This life is embedded in every street corner, every color, every postured client dinner, every phone call and presentation and partners meeting. And viewing the way that this setting reflects this evergreen idea through such meticulous visual storytelling is something exquisitely beautiful to behold, something that I'll never stop coming back to. Many thanks for watching.